London, in the height of the season, glittered with chandeliers and ambition, yet nowhere was its cruelty more visible than in the grand ballroom of Lady Weatherford's house. It was here that Lady Eleanor Haraway, in her carefully mended ivory gown, stepped into the golden haze of candlelight with the determined composure of a woman who refused to be bent by circumstance. She knew the whispers had begun before her slippers even touched the marble floor. Her father's finances, her lack of fashionable attire, her inconvenient intelligence, every flaw was catalogued with the precision of jewelers examining counterfeit pearls. Still, she lifted her chin and moved forward, believing dignity to be the only armor left to her. Most women entered a ballroom seeking admiration. Eleanor entered seeking survival. The men barely glanced at her, for she had no dowry to tempt them, and the women looked only long enough to reassure themselves that she posed no threat. But Eleanor had long ago accepted that her value existed outside their petty measures, and she carried this conviction like a quiet flame. She paused near a column garlanded with hothouse roses, unaware that her momentary stillness made her stand out more than any jeweled gown could. From across the room, a ripple of hushed excitement signaled the arrival of Alexander Cavendish, the newly returned Duke of Rothwell. He cut a striking figure in black formal dress, his expression steady, almost unreadable, as though the familiar rituals of society scarcely touched him. Years spent abroad in diplomatic service had carved restraint into his features, yet the quiet power he carried seemed to magnify the room's attention. Mothers nudged daughters, fans fluttered like startled wings, and a small circle of hopeful debutantes drifted toward him with rehearsed smiles. Eleanor, however, did not move, nor did she pretend interest. Her gaze remained fixed on a modest arrangement of winter lilies nearby, the only decoration in the room not competing for admiration. It was this very indifference that drew Alexander's attention to her, like a single calm note in a clamor of violins. He studied her quietly, noticing the dignity in her posture, the intelligence in her eyes, and the faint weariness she concealed as carefully as her mended gown. When he requested an introduction, the nearby chaperones reacted with startled delight, as though witnessing the opening move of a grand social victory. Eleanor, hearing her name spoken, turned with a polite nod, yet her eyes held a coolness that halted him more effectively than any barrier. She curtsied, but only slightly, offering the courtesy due to his rank and nothing beyond it. Alexander attempted conversation, asking whether she found the evening agreeable, but Eleanor answered with gentle brevity that left no room for flirtation. His surprise flickered only briefly, for he was not accustomed to disinterest, yet the novelty of it caught his attention more sharply than admiration ever had. Around them, the murmurs of the ballroom swelled, for nothing invited speculation more quickly than a woman who did not seek a duke's favor. Several ladies nearby exchanged glances of thinly veiled glee, already fashioning narratives that explained Eleanor's restraint as foolishness or arrogance. Her refusal to participate in their silent competition only sharpened their interest in her eventual downfall. Eleanor sensed their eyes upon her, yet she remained composed, determined not to be drawn into a drama she never sought. She offered the Duke a final courteous smile before stepping aside, signaling that she wished the conversation to end. Her withdrawal was subtle, executed with the grace expected of her upbringing, yet unmistakably firm. Alexander watched her go, an unreadable expression settling over his features, as though the encounter had shifted some internal axis he had not realized was capable of movement. For the first time that evening, he felt the faint stirrings of genuine curiosity, a sensation both unfamiliar and oddly stirring. Eleanor rejoined her small circle near the far wall, unaware that her refusal had become the central topic of whispered speculation. She pretended not to hear the murmuring voices around her, knowing too well that any reaction would only confirm what they sought to believe. Yet beneath her calm, a quiet frustration churned, for she had no desire to be thrust into the spotlight by a man she did not wish to impress. Still, she could not deny the strange awareness his presence had awakened in her, like a distant echo she did not yet understand. The orchestra began a new waltz, and couples spun across the floor with synchronized elegance, their motion casting shifting patterns of shadow and light. Eleanor watched them, Feeling the faint ache of longing she permitted herself only in unguarded moments, a longing not for wealth or rank, but for genuine regard. Across the room, Alexander still observed her, not with the idle curiosity of a man accustomed to admiration, but with a searching intent he could not entirely conceal. His family expected him to choose a bride whose lineage and dowry secured the Cavendish legacy, yet none of those prospects lingered in his thoughts as she did. Eleanor sensed the weight of his gaze again and turned away, unwilling to grant him the satisfaction of acknowledgement. But even as she looked elsewhere, she felt the unsettling truth settling over her. The Duke's attention had found her, and such attention rarely loosened its hold once fixed. Around her, the air thickened with unspoken judgments, and she felt each one press against her resolve like tightening corset stays. Alexander stepped nearer as though drawn by instinct, yet paused when he sensed that pursuing her too boldly would shatter the fragile moment. Eleanor felt the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, aware that any further interaction might alter the course of her evening irrevocably. She retreated another step, steadying her breath, determined to preserve her independence even as curiosity threatened to loosen her careful restraint. Yet both felt the moment linger, delicate and unresolved, like a promise awaiting dawn. The scandal began with an object so innocently wrapped that no one could have imagined the storm it would unleash. Eleanor discovered the parcel on her family's modest hall table one pale morning, its fine paper and precise seal marking it unmistakably as a gift from someone of considerable rank. Her heartbeat quickened with an instinctive unease rather than pleasure. She broke the wax only enough to see the title of the book within, a rare botanical volume she had once admired from afar. That the Duke of Rothwell remembered such a detail unsettled her more deeply than any lavish gesture could. She closed the parcel at once, unable to bear the implication. After a long breath, she resolved to return it entirely untouched, knowing full well the whispers such an act might provoke. When the package was delivered back to the Cavendish townhouse, unaccepted and unsigned, London society reacted with a disbelief bordering on outrage. A duke's gift returned? By a woman with neither fortune nor influence? The Ton devoured the story eagerly, embellishing each retelling with new layers of supposed insult. Some claimed Eleanor had laughed at the offering, others that she intended to manipulate his attention by withholding gratitude. A few insisted she must have misunderstood the value of the gesture entirely. Truth, as always, mattered little. What mattered was that a woman without prestige had, in the eyes of many, overstepped the invisible boundaries that defined her place. Alexander heard the rumors long before the parcel returned to his hands. Though accustomed to gossip, he found himself strangely irritated by the petty interpretations of his motives and hers. He requested a private moment to examine the unopened book, but the sight of it offered no clarity. Instead, it stirred questions he had not known he carried. Why had she refused it? Why did her refusal disturb him? It was not wounded pride, for he was not a man easily slighted. Rather, there was a rare fascination in encountering someone who neither pursued nor feared him. Eleanor Haraway continued to unsettle him, and the feeling, though unwelcome, was unmistakably compelling. Their next encounter occurred at the charity bazaar of the Duchess of Langford, a gathering known for attracting both the most charitable hearts and the most determined social strategists. Eleanor attended reluctantly, for her family's situation demanded she remain within society's view, regardless of how unwelcome that view felt. She was studying a collection of hand-sewn linens when Alexander approached, his steps unhurried yet unmistakably purposeful. Her breath tightened in her chest, though she masked it behind polite composure. He greeted her with formal warmth, choosing his words with deliberate gentleness, but she answered coolly, keenly aware of the curious eyes fixed upon them. Still, something in her expression softened when he spoke of the book, not with reproach, but with genuine curiosity as to why it displeased her. Eleanor hesitated, torn between honesty and caution. She finally confessed, in quiet tones meant for him alone, that she could not accept a gift whose intention she did not understand, especially from a man whose attention might place her reputation in peril. The admission revealed far more of her inner turmoil than she intended. Alexander, taken aback by the sincerity of her reasoning, found himself admiring her restraint, for few would have turned away something so valuable with such measured dignity. Yet even as they spoke, Eleanor sensed the weight of the surrounding spectators, each silently shaping the interaction into something scandalous. She stepped back, unwilling to feed the murmurs. But her departure left him with a lingering sense of unfinished conversation. By the following week, fresh rumors spread like wildfire through drawing rooms and dinner parties. It was said that Alexander intended to offer for a wealthy heiress whose dowry rivaled that of small estates. Some whispered that negotiations were nearly complete, orchestrated by his formidable relatives. Though neither Alexander nor the heiress publicly acknowledged such claims, the Tun treated the matter as nearly settled. Eleanor tried to convince herself she felt nothing at the thought, yet the news lodged in her mind with quiet, unwelcome persistence, disturbing her sleep in ways she could not fully name. She told herself that she wished only to avoid being entangled in fantasies others forged around her. Still, some part of her bristled at the suggestion of him choosing a woman whose primary virtue was wealth. Worse still was the rumor that Eleanor herself had been seen in compromising proximity with a gentleman she barely knew. A harmless exchange in a crowded vestibule, nothing more than a brief inquiry after her comfort during the evening, had been twisted into insinuation. Invitations previously extended to her began quietly disappearing. A few friends, fearing association, withdrew. Eleanor absorbed each silent rejection with outward composure, but in private, she felt herself shrinking beneath the pressure of judgment she could not combat. Her father, earnest but helpless, tried to reassure her that scandals often blew over quickly. Yet his hopeful words rang hollow. Alexander heard of the rumor and felt an unexpected surge of anger, sharp and protective. He contradicted one particularly vicious whisper during a gentleman's gathering, stating plainly that the accusations were unfounded. The room fell into stunned silence. A duke defending a woman so publicly was a gesture too bold to be interpreted as mere courtesy. Word of his response reached Eleanor the next day, leaving her caught between gratitude and dread. Gratitude, because his defense softened the hostility around her. Dread, because his involvement deepened the very complications she wished to avoid. Her unease grew exponentially when she received an invitation bearing the seal of the Dowager Duchess of Rothwell. The elegant handwriting inside stated simply that the Duchess wished to speak with her. Eleanor's stomach tightened at the sight of the message, for such summons rarely boded well for a woman of her precarious standing. She feared reprimand, humiliation, or worse, a demand that she remove herself entirely from the Duke's notice. Yet refusing to attend would only amplify the whispers already swirling through London that on the morning of the visit, Eleanor dressed with trembling hands, choosing a plain but immaculate gown. As her carriage approached the imposing Rothwell townhouse, she felt the full weight of what lay before her. She stepped onto the stone steps with measured composure, aware that her life might change with whatever words awaited inside. The great doors opened, and she was led through a quiet corridor heavy with ancestral portraits and unspoken authority. When she reached the threshold of the Duchess's drawing room, Eleanor drew one last steadying breath, bracing herself for the blow she feared most, that she must surrender any connection, however fragile, to the man who had begun to occupy her thoughts far more than she dared admit. Eleanor entered the Dowager Duchess's drawing room with the grace of someone prepared to face condemnation, though her heart beat wildly beneath her composed exterior. The Duchess sat near the hearth, dignified in dark silk, her posture straight, her gaze sharp with a clarity age had not dimmed. Eleanor curtsied deeply, bracing for rebuke, but the Duchess gestured for her to rise with a gentleness that immediately unsettled her expectations. For a long moment, the older woman simply studied her, as though assessing not appearance, but character. When she finally spoke, her voice carried neither accusation nor disdain. Instead, it held a calm, measured authority. She asked Eleanor to sit, offering tea with a courtesy that left Eleanor momentarily adrift. It was not a trap, she realized, but something infinitely more disarming. An invitation. The Duchess began by addressing the rumors, not with melodrama, but with weary comprehension. As though gossip were a familiar enemy she had long battled. She assured Eleanor that she did not believe a word spoken against her. The declaration shocked Eleanor more profoundly than any reprimand might have. When she attempted to respond, the Duchess lifted a hand, silencing her gently. She then spoke of Alexander, her grandson, not in boastful praise, but with a candid affection that revealed both pride and concern. She explained that Alexander respected Eleanor, not for novelty or rebellion, but for integrity, something he found increasingly rare. The words unsettled Eleanor deeply. She had never imagined a duchess might see her as anything other than a threat to propriety. When Eleanor finally managed to speak, she confessed her fear that Alexander's attention was misplaced, that she had nothing to offer a man of his standing except the certainty of scandal. The duchess listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Eleanor finished, the older woman leaned forward, her eyes steady. She said that titles meant little without sincerity, and that a man shaped by duty might recognize value where society did not. Eleanor felt her throat tighten, surprised by a sudden rush of emotion she had long restrained. The Duchess placed a gentle hand over hers, as though granting silent permission for hope to exist, if only narrowly. Moments later, a soft knock interrupted them. The butler announced that the Duke had returned unexpectedly. Eleanor stiffened, sensing danger in the coincidence. She rose at once, insisting she should leave, but the Duchess urged her to remain, declaring that running from a conversation rarely improved its outcome. Before Eleanor could protest further, Alexander entered the room, pausing at the sight of her. Something in his expression softened instantly, betraying concern, relief, and a flicker of something deeper. Eleanor felt her pulse falter as he approached. Offering a bow that held more sincerity than ceremony, the Duchess, in a rare act of quiet orchestration, excused herself under the pretense of overseeing a household matter. Her departure was so deliberate that Eleanor felt the weight of intention settle around them. Alexander waited until the door closed before speaking. His voice, usually so composed, hesitated with unspoken tension. He asked whether she had been summoned out of reprimand. Eleanor shook her head slowly, explaining that the Duchess had shown only kindness. The truth of it left him visibly relieved. He moved closer, though he maintained enough distance to honor her comfort. The space between them felt charged, as though every unspoken thought hung in the air awaiting release. Eleanor gathered her courage and asked him directly why he had sought her attention in a world filled with more suitable candidates. The question hung between them like a blade. Alexander answered without embellishment, revealing that he admired her refusal to chase him as others did. He valued her honesty, her restraint, her insight, qualities he had not realized he longed for until he saw them in her. Eleanor stood motionless, absorbing each word with rising disbelief. She replied cautiously, admitting she feared being chosen merely because she was the only woman who did not want him. A faint smile tugged at his lips, though his eyes remained earnest. He told her that desire founded in admiration, not convenience, carried a force few understood. Their conversation grew increasingly raw, peeling away the veneer of social courtesy. Eleanor confessed her dread of becoming a subject of ridicule, or worse, pity. Alexander admitted he feared a life built on political expectation rather than affection. He spoke of the pressure to secure alliances, to maintain family reputation, to marry a woman whose fortune outweighed her character. The vulnerability in his admission stirred something deep within Eleanor, awakening a tenderness she had fought so fiercely to suppress. She sensed that his intentions, though bold, were not capricious. He did not wish to possess her. He wished to know her. They stepped into the small winter garden adjoining the drawing room, drawn by instinct toward privacy. Bare branches framed a quiet space dusted with frost, and soft sunlight filtered through the glass panes above. Eleanor felt the cold settle around them, yet her chest warmed with the nearness of him. Alexander paused beneath a leafless archway, turning to face her fully. He spoke then with a quiet intensity that made her breath tremble. He told her she was the first woman whose regard he hoped to earn, not claim. The sincerity in his voice shook her. She felt her defenses weaken, not from pressure but from the profound gentleness with which he offered himself. Before she could respond, footsteps approached from beyond the garden doors. A footman entered, breathless with urgency, carrying a letter addressed to the Duke. Alexander opened it swiftly, his brow darkening as he read. The message announced that Eleanor's father's remaining debts had been publicly exposed by a creditor seeking payment. The scandal, already simmering, now threatened to erupt into a spectacle. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her. She stepped back, insisting that he must not be seen near her, for association with her now would endanger his standing beyond repair. Alexander refuted her immediately, grasping her hands with a firmness that startled her. He declared that he would not abandon her to society's cruelty, no matter the cost. She begged him to reconsider, pleading that she could not accept protection rooted in pity or rebellion. But Alexander denied both interpretations. His choice, he insisted, had nothing to do with rescue and everything to do with conviction. He vowed he would face whatever consequences society hurled, because the alternative, losing the possibility of her, felt immeasurably worse. That evening, at the final ball of the season, the ballroom stirred with anticipation as Alexander entered. Eleanor stood at the far end, prepared to be invisible, resigned to disgrace. Yet Alexander crossed the floor with unwavering intent, ignoring every startled whisper. He stopped before her and extended his hand, asking her to dance with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. The room fell silent, every rival silent, every spectator breathless. Eleanor felt her heart shatter and mend all at once. She accepted. As they moved together, their steps sealed not a triumph, but a choice, one that defied the ton's expectations and rewrote the course of both their lives. When the waltz ended, he did not release her hand. Instead, before the assembled crowd, he declared openly his intention to court her. Gasps rippled through the ballroom, yet no one dared challenge him. Eleanor lifted her gaze to him, her eyes luminous with disbelief and fragile hope. The moment held them both suspended, teetering between ruin and something brilliantly uncharted. And as the whispers broke like a storm around them, they stood together, unbowed, on the edge of a future neither had dared imagine.